Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to beautiful Denver. We return here. Charlie and I were just reminiscing about the first time we had the meteorology and system operations workshop or something like that, we called it. Very, very cold week in St. Paul. Somewhere, when was that, 2006 maybe, or even before then? It was really cold. It was chilly, like 20 below cold. So we got better weather for this, and I'm so happy to see us back here again in person. My name is Mark Ahlstrom. I'm the VP of Renewable Energy Policy at NextEra Energy Resources, and also happy to serve as president of the board of directors for ESIG. And welcome to the workshop. We're going to kick it off with this opening plenary. Charlie Smith will be giving us an overview of the state of the industry, and then we'll dive right into a series of great presentations by some of the thought leaders in our space here and get into the whole event. I encourage everybody also to attend tonight the reception at 6:30, starting back in the room where we just had lunch. It's a great opportunity to follow up with conversations and discussions around all these topics. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Charlie, and we're going to dive right into this. And it's great to see everybody here in person. Please be safe and enjoy your week. Thanks.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back from the tutorial this morning, from those of you who were able to participate. I'm going to give my updated introduction and overview, as Mark said, the state of the art, both of the industry and just a quick tour through the agenda for the workshop here. We do have parallel workshops going on, one on grid forming inverters downstairs on level 2, and this one on meteorology and markets up on level 3, and you're free and welcome to go back and forth if you like, but I know that kind of the meteorology world and the grid forming inverter world are kind of separate from each other, so I know many of you will be staying where you are. So we have the sessions this afternoon and the reception tonight, as Mark mentioned, and 4 great sessions tomorrow. Integration of probabilistic forecast into the EMS and MMS. It's something we did 3 or 4 years ago. It was very popular, and I think this update will be quite illuminating and informative as well. Dynamic reserve applications, panel that Debbie is going to chair tomorrow morning. And then climate change and extreme weather conditions. We're not going to experience them here tomorrow afternoon. We're just going to talk about how they impact planning and operations. And then Thursday morning, a little bit deeper into the markets and how they're evolving in light of all of the zero marginal cost renewable energy that's coming in, and then an interesting closing plenary. So usually I take a look at the Lazard report that comes out at the end of every year. Lazard report's they've been doing this for over 10 years or so now. They used to be an investment bank of sorts. Now they're more of an investment advisor, consulting service, but they do a levelized cost of energy for the U on an annual basis, and they report a lot of numbers: the highest average cost, the lowest average cost, the median cost, and I just picked out the lowest unsubsidized energy cost across a number of sources. There you can see the high ones: rooftop residential solar and simple cycle gas turbines up around $150 a megawatt hour. You can see the ones in the middle, nuclear and coal. Those numbers are getting harder and harder to come by because they're not building any nuclear or coal, but they're old numbers. Community solar keeps coming down, but it still hasn't gotten down below combined cycle yet. If you remember these numbers from a few years ago, combined cycle was up in the low 50s, and the utility scale solar was right there neck and neck with it. So now about 5 years later, you can see utility scale solar at $28 a megawatt hour, wind energy at $26 a megawatt hour. So those are the lowest unsubsidized energy costs. So then take a look at the 2 numbers down in the bottom. These are recent power purchase agreement prices from the last year or so. This is after the production tax credit or the investment tax credit has been applied. This is the price that the utility is buying at from the developer, if the developer is the one who's getting the subsidies. Utility scale solar at $15 to $22 a megawatt hour, and wind energy at $11 to $25 a megawatt hour. $11 a megawatt hour, that's a penny a kilowatt hour. That's pretty incredible numbers. And those are really the numbers that are driving the interest in renewable energy, not only in the US, but around the world today. Lazard does the same thing for storage systems as they do for the other forms of energy. And they've been doing that for a little shorter period of time, maybe 3-4 years. So into 2021, the lowest estimated unsubsidized energy costs, and I'd say estimated, they do these calculations using the same set of assumptions across the board for all the financial parameters. So you can argue with any one of the numbers on either one of the charts I just showed, but the thing about them is that they're comparative. You can compare them one to another. It's an apples to apples comparison, not an apples to oranges comparison. Just looking at these first two lines here, peaker replacement. So this is a 4-hour battery, 100 megawatts lithium ion, $131 a megawatt hour. Remember, that's below the cost that we saw on the previous slide of the simple cycle gas turbine. Utility scale PV plus storage, or PV plus storage hybrid. This particular one is a PV at 40 megawatts and storage at 20 megawatts with a 4-hour battery. That's a common ratio that's used in PV battery hybrids. Storage rating about half the PV rating with a 4-hour battery. $85 a megawatt hour. And then again, I would call your attention to the bottom of the slide, a power purchase agreement bid at El Paso Electric. I think this was actually last year. PV plus battery at $21 a megawatt hour. These are incredible numbers. And there's a lot in the press today. I think I mentioned it again, that there's a lot going on in the world. The war in Ukraine being one of the things that's causing scarcity of some of the minerals that were coming out of Russia, and the disruption of supply chains around the world. It's driving some of these numbers, going to drive some of the inputs to these numbers up again. And there's going to be some fluctuations I expect we'll see in the next year, but I think the trend is in one direction. So last year, Lazard added hydrogen to the mix, because hydrogen is anticipated to be another big thing, or the big thing in the next decade. I kind of look at the evolution of these technologies in decadal terms, going back to the 90s as the decade of wind, the first 10 years of this century as the decade of PV, the last 10 years as the decade of batteries, and the next 10 years as the decade of hydrogen. Amazing things have happened on those 10-year timescales. So here we see electrolyzer capital costs across the top, varying between $510 and $760 a kilowatt. And then down the side, you see energy costs for the charging energy for the electrolyzers, $20 to $60 a megawatt hour. And then looking in the matrix, you see the resulting cost of hydrogen from a alkaline electrolyzer running at a high capacity factor. And you see numbers in the middle of $2, $3, $4 a kilogram. And $1 a kilogram, just for reference purposes, is about $8 a million BTU in terms of natural gas. So you can see we're even at the lowest cost of the capital cost and the charging cost, you're still at $1.76. That's pretty far away from $1, but that's the challenge that hydrogen is facing in the next decade. So if you remember in the past, I've often taken a look at the BP energy outlook. It's an energy outlook that BP does every couple of years. They update their assumptions. They don't make forecasts, they do scenarios. So there's a couple of scenarios in here that try to kind of bookend where they think things are going. And on the left are some hydrogen numbers. You can see that the colors in the bars are gray, blue, and green. So the green hydrogen is hydrogen from an electrolyzer, so it's clean green hydrogen. The gray hydrogen is hydrogen from a steam reforming process. So you put in natural gas and I guess it's with water and get out hydrogen and carbon dioxide. And then the blue hydrogen is gray hydrogen with carbon capture and sequestration on it. So those are the three different sources. And you can see, and there's 3 scenarios also, if you look in the kind of the middle on the right-hand side. The rapid decarbonization, let me start with the business as usual decarbonization scenario, which leads to about a 10% reduction in CO2 emissions from 2020 to 2050. Then you see the rapid decarbonization scenario, which leads to about a 70% CO2 reduction from 2020 to 2050, which is kind of in line with the 2 degree C rise from the climate change scenarios. And then the net zero, which is about a 95% carbon reduction between now and 2050, which is closer to the 1.5 degree scenarios. So you can see in the rapid scenario, the growth of hydrogen from 2035 to 2050. And then in the net zero, about double the amount of hydrogen from 2035 to 2050. And the assumption is that about half of it would be coming from electrolysis, and the other half would be coming from gray hydrogen. And on the right-hand side is the annual average increase in wind and solar capacity for, on the bottom 3 curves, the 3 scenarios, the business as usual, the rapid decarbonization, and the net zero. And then on the top curve, the dotted line curve, that's net zero with 100% green hydrogen. So if all that blue hydrogen was converted to green hydrogen, that's what the top curve is for. And if you look at the axis is an annual average increase in wind and solar capacity. It goes from, these are global numbers, by the way, these are not US numbers. So looking at 2020 timeframe, maybe up around 200 gigawatts of installed solar and wind capacity, and looking at increases to 1,000 gigawatts per year out in the 2035 to 2040 timeframe, with half of the hydrogen being green. And if all of it's green, then going from like 1,000 to about 1,300 gigawatts per year to produce that kind of hydrogen. So it's massive, massive numbers that we're talking about here. Really tremendous changes that would take place if these, depending on which, which path we end up on, and which scenarios play out in reality. But I think it gives you some size of the challenge that the world faces. And in our country, going back to the US and interconnection queues, if you've seen the numbers recently, there's 1,400 gigawatts of wind, solar, and storage currently sitting in interconnection queues. There's about 1,000 gigawatts of installed capacity in the country today, round numbers, plus or minus 100 gigawatts. I say, what's 100 gigawatts among friends? But the 1,400 gigawatts of capacity stuck in the queues is kind of a mind-numbing number, but it's illustrative of the problem before us of fixing the broken interconnection process and building transmission to move that energy once it gets built to where it's needed. So some numbers overall globally, currently about 750 gigawatts of wind and solar capacity installed each around the world. These numbers are kind of hard to come by. You look at different sources and they're plus or minus 10, 20, 30 gigawatts, but basically in 2021, about 90 gigawatts of wind, 180 gigawatts of PV installed around the world, so roughly twice as much PV and wind, and similar sorts of numbers for 2022, depending on what happens, given some of the trends that are taking place in the world right now. But it's here to stay. This stuff isn't going away. It's part of the future. It's a big part of the future, and people are going to be dealing with it and learning how to operate systems that are based on inverter-based resources instead of synchronous machines. This is a slide from the the EIA, the Energy Information Administration of the DOE. It looks at the use of all fuels to create the electricity in the US. I guess it was last year, 2010 to 20, it ends at last year, 2021, starts at 2010. You can see that the source of the fuels for the electricity is roughly 20% from renewables, 20% from nuclear, 20% from coal, and about 40% from natural gas. And that adds up to the 100% of the fuel use. You can see the coal is coming down fairly dramatically. Natural gas is kind of leveled off, and you can see renewables has been on the increase, nuclear pretty flat. So that's a picture of where we're at. So a lot of work yet to be done. Well, I'd like to point out some interesting trends that are taking place around the world. I'm not going to go through all these. I'm just going to pick out one or two. One I'm going to pick out is one in the middle from EEI. This is Tom Kuhn, the president of EEI, saying a year ago in January of 21, EEI is advocating for policies that support our clean energy transition. We voiced our support for America rejoining the Paris Agreement, as well as getting critical transmission and energy grid infrastructure built more quickly. The transmission system is key to integrating more renewables, more clean energy, and more technologies into the grid affordably and reliably. So you would expect the president of EEI to say what he did towards the end there, but the part at the beginning, I think, is a little bit of a surprise. It was a surprise to me, I know, when I read it, because EEI is not known as the most progressive organization in the US, but the utilities get the message, EEI gets the message, and I think they're on board. The other interesting thing to note is that we've got about 200 gigawatts of coal capacity left in the country, and about 70 gigawatts of that capacity is planned by utilities to be closed by 2028. So that'll take us down to, something closer to 120 or 30 gigawatts. Recent hydrogen headlines. Take a look at that top one. Global green hydrogen pipeline exceeds 250 gigawatts. I looked at that number and I said, they made a mistake. It's not 250 gigawatts, it's 250 megawatts. And I read it again, but it was 250 gigawatts. And I said, how the hell could there be 250 gigawatts of hydrogen in a pipeline? And you start looking at the projects. They had a list of about 20 projects. The top 3 projects on the list were like 50 gigawatt hydrogen projects. One of them was in Texas. World's largest green hydrogen project unveiled in Texas with a plan to produce clean rocket fuel for Elon Musk. The 60 gigawatt hydrogen city project, on-site salt cavern storage for hydrogen. First 2 gigawatts scheduled to begin operation in 2026. That's kind of, it's either exciting or scary, one or the other. And then a little further down, the DOE hydrogen shot, launched in June 2021, trying to reduce the cost of green hydrogen from about $5 to $1 a kilogram, getting it down to $8 a million BTU, which is competitive with sources of hydrogen from fossil fuels. So that's a challenge that DOE has taken up for this decade. Virtual power plants. I remember 2 or 3 years ago, I was standing up here talking about the first virtual power plant, the 20 megawatt plant in New England that cleared the ISO New England capacity market. And since that time, hundreds of VPPs have been built. There's hundreds of megawatts of installed capacity. In fact, there's gigawatts of installed capacity in Europe. They're taken off and it looked to be a quite effective mechanism for aggregating a lot of the distributed energy resources and demand response for participation in the competitive wholesale markets under FERC Order 2222. Offshore wind, another quickly moving area. European offshore targets, 60 gigawatts by 2030, 300 gigawatts by 2050. Look in the US, we have a 30 gigawatt offshore wind target by 2030. 40 gigawatts has been announced as state goals by 2040. And DOE says that if that goal is reached, it will unlock a pathway to 110 gigawatts by 2050. And what's the big concern? Transmission. There's a lot of other offshore wind activity going on around the world. And I think that it's going to be a big thing for the next couple of decades in Europe, especially because the land use onshore is getting kind of crowded. They needed to move offshore before anybody else did to find some more space to expand with the wind. So they're a little bit ahead of us in that arena as well. EVs, bans on internal combustion engines continue to grow. The UK has outlawed internal combustion sale after 2030. Quebec after 2035, and California after 2035, China after 2035. And I noted at the bottom, I think when I wrote this, the governor hadn't signed it, but now the state of Washington has a 2030 internal combustion engine deadline as well. And GM has announced that it will end the sale of all gasoline and diesel powered passenger cars and light duty SUVs by 2035. So there's pretty big move afoot with electric transportation as well. A couple other things that I found of interest here. Northvolt, a Swedish battery manufacturer building a new 60 gigawatt hour plant in Germany, has secured more than $50 billion worth of EV battery contracts since 2016. That's kind of a big number. And then the one Gemini battery achieves a 752-mile range in the Tesla Model 6. It's a 200 kilowatt hour battery. It fit into a 100 kilowatt hour battery compartment. And the goal is to sell it at the same price as the current battery by 2026. So big things afoot there as well. Bulk storage tidbits. I was talking to Amber this morning. I don't know if she's here right now, but I had heard from somebody else at Cal ISO that by the end of 2023, they hope to have 5 gigawatts online. She told me there's 5 gigawatts online today. ERCOT, I heard the same thing, planning to have 5 gigawatts of batteries by the end of 2023, maybe sooner. But along with the pumped hydro, that brings US storage capacity to 30 gigawatts at the end of 2021. China, State Grid Corporation of China, when they do things, they do them big. They have plans for 30 gigawatts of batteries basically batteries by 2025, up from 3 gigawatts today. But they have plans to increase the storage capacity to 100 gigawatts by 2030. In addition to that, they plan to increase their pumped hydro storage from about 30 gigawatts to 100 gigawatts by 2030. Huge, huge numbers. The electricity demand under all three of the scenarios from BP Energy continues to grow fairly, the transition to renewables continues to grow fairly rapidly. On the left-hand side, you can see the share of electricity and total final consumption for the three different scenarios, and you can see where it's coming from on the right. An interesting thing to note in looking at business as usual to net zero is that the electrification trend that's predicted, and also the decreased amount of electricity in buildings because of the expectation that if we continue business as usual, then we won't be making as many investments in energy efficiency and buildings will be using more energy. So a lot of interacting factors in their models, I'm sure. But for all three of the scenarios too, you look at the growth of renewables, that's the upward growing curve. In orange, wind and solar compared to natural gas and coal, natural gas in red, coal in black. You can see in business as usual to rapid to net zero, very rapid growth in the renewables, kind of leveling off and then slowly declining in the natural gas, and then more rapid declining in the coal. I want to say a few words about upcoming meetings. We are going to be back in Minneapolis in October. Mark has assured me that the temperatures will remain above zero for the duration of our meeting there. So hope we'll see some of you at the fall meeting in Minneapolis. We'll be back in Tucson in March of next year, 27 to 30, and back in Denver in June for the Meteorology and Markets Workshop. And the IEEE magazine, the December 2019 issue with all of the renewables integration papers in it is out there on the registration desk. Welcome you to take a copy and read it on the airplane. Want to really welcome our visitors who came from far away, either virtually or in person, from around the world to participate in the workshops today. Glad to see you here. Don't want to forget the great nation of Texas. I always remember them in my remarks. So glad to see you all here. I'm very pleased to be back in person again, as Mark said. Hope that you take the time to enjoy yourself, make some new friends, and looking forward to another great meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. You know, ESIG goes back all the way to 1989 when Charlie really created it as the Utility Wind Interest Group. And it's always been the safe place to have peer-to-peer discussions on some of the really cutting edge issues with power systems and renewables and now decarbonization more broadly. So, and Charlie's walking away with the mic on, so, okay. So this is a safe place. We always view this as a safe place to have peer-to-peer discussions around the topics that are the most relevant. In fact, we intentionally put together the agendas literally just a month or two ahead of the meetings, try to keep it very fresh, because we always want to be what you want to talk about and provide the opportunity for you to talk about it, both in these sessions and then over food, over receptions and so forth. And it's really, for me, I've been coming for 20 years. It's always been a special place to learn and to ask stupid questions and to just keep learning. And it's very important we also kind of throw out somewhat crazy ideas to keep trying to think outside of the box. And so I think the next speaker shares that attribute with me in terms of trying to really shake stuff up once in a while to great effect. My good friend, Pascal Storck, met him when he was the founder of 3-Tier. He's now with Vaisala and heads up Vaisala's renewable energy digital services business. He has over 20 years experience in renewable energy field, specifically working with customers around the world to manage the inherent weather-related challenges of these projects. So please welcome Pascal.
Well, I'm going to just kind of talk about, 4 main themes of, what I've been up to, what Vaisala has been up to, since it acquired 3-Tier. And I'm going to go through it fairly quickly. It's a little bit of a hodgepodge of things, a dog's breakfast, if you will. But these are the things I kind of find exciting. I just want to share them with you all, and we can chat about it over a drink later. Well, yeah, this conference used to be called the Utility Wind Integration Group, right? And wind set the stage for all of us. We cut our teeth on it, if you will. But oh boy, is solar stealing the show, right? So let's take a look at some of those forecasts. Charlie asked me to talk about hydro. Hydro is the sort of, forgotten grandfather of renewable energy, right? And I'm not talking hydrogen, I'm talking hydro, stream flow and dams and all that stuff. Wow, forecasting hydro has always been hard. We used to have a business doing that. We gave that to somebody else after I saw the quality of their forecasts, and I want to show you that. And it has some implications for what we do for wind and solar. Dynamic line rate, TLDR does not just stand for too long didn't read. It also stands for, transmission line dynamic rating. Great. That needs forecasting too. And finally, kind of a subject that's near and dear to my heart, we've been talking about integration. I think now there's questions about resource adequacy, even with battery storage. What happens when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine for an entire month? Are we ready for that, right? Okay, so real quick. Wind sets the stage, solar steals the show. Texas, ERCOT, this is from January 2018. Wind is on the top through yesterday. Solar is on the bottom, January 2018 through yesterday. Yeah, okay, so 60% increase in the peak, going from about 15 gigawatt hours peak to about 25 gigawatt hours peak for wind. But solar 10x, it's been doubling every year. Is it going to continue to double every year? Yeah, probably not. Did like 1.8 times last year, but it sure is coming up the exponential growth curve. So much so that it is beginning to have an impact on the market itself and on prices. So because of that, we want to take a look at the accuracy of the solar forecasts. And I'd say overall we've got some work to do. So on the top, there's a lot there, but the 2 top panels is April and May. Those are the forecasts for the day ahead that the system operator gets, that ERCOT gets, and transmits out to the market as a signal, about what's going to happen. But what you can see is that the black is the observation of the total amount of energy that was produced by solar, and the yellow lines is the day ahead forecast. And sadly, you see a lot of yellow on the graph. You shouldn't see a lot of yellow on the graph. And you can also see that there are a lot of days where, Texas ERCOT thinks it's going to be sunny and it isn't, right? So that's something that we all need to work on. We do know that it's possible to forecast better than that because we make a forecast at Vaisala for market participants in the system. And now they're starting to take interest. We had to sell this product to folks last year. They said it has only 5 gigawatts, who cares? This year, 10 gigawatts, people care a lot more, right? And you can see it is actually possible to predict a cloudy day a day in advance. Don't let anyone else, tell you that that's not possible. So if you look at the statistics of this overall, I'll just point this out here, the public forecast has a bias of plus 700 megawatts and a root mean squared error of about 1,500 megawatts. And we have a bias of about 40 megawatts, right? Because we can predict a cloudy day in advance. And a root mean squared error of about 900. What's most interesting is that there's just day after day, not in July when it's sunny all the time, but in these shoulder months where the public forecast has greater than 4 gigawatts over prediction on cloudy days. So this is just something, our forecast is not perfect, their forecast is not perfect. I think day ahead solar accuracy and actually producing good forecasts for these projects at a system-wide level is something that we're all going to be working on for a while. All right, hydro and next generation AI. Every once in a while, you take a look at the competitive landscape and you take a look at what you're doing and you say, I wonder who else is in the space. And you look at their stuff and you say, wow, that's amazing. I didn't know that was possible, right? This is an example of that. This is a company that we do some work with and actually gave them our entire hydro forecasting business. Said, you guys are so good at this, we're done, you take it from here, right? And I'll show you the examples of that in just a second. If I swing this one here, this was their claim. Hydro forecast swept a year-long short-term flow forecasting competition. Swept. Well, what does swept mean? Right? It means that they were #1 in every category. And what blew me away was that they don't need any weather stations in the watershed. No precipitation gauges. You can keep your tipping bucket at home. They don't need temperature gauges. They don't need any of that stuff. They're using global reanalysis data, ECMWF high resolution forecasts as the spin up for their initial states. No in situ observations required to do what they're doing. All modern machine learning, all big data, all physical model emulation AI, sort of the next generation of this stuff, right? And when you look here, which button? The one on the right is the laser pointer? Oh, the big button. There we go. These little icons here are every single one of these categories that they want. They want every single category except one. Look at these skill scores here. Hydro forecast approaching 1. Now, NOAA River Forecast Center, they've been doing this for a long time. Getting all the observations and doing all this stuff. They're good at it, right? So is, the other folks that are listed down here. These folks here just ran away with it. So one of the questions that I ask myself is, I still see these requirements. If to interconnect a renewable energy project to the grid, you have to have a permanent met mast so that your forecaster can forecast. Well, if they can forecast for an entire watershed with no in situ observations and no precipitation gauges, then why on earth does your forecaster need a wind solar station to predict energy output, right? Are the days of observations numbered to be replaced with AI and simulation? I think yes. And I'm saying this as Vaisala, as a company that makes all of its money with in situ observations. Yeah. Now, I go to management meetings and they tell me to get the F out. Right. All right. Dynamic line rating. Too long, didn't read. Transmission, transmission, transmission. Absolutely. So if we're not going to build it fast enough, right, because of NIMBY and expense and all these other things, well, then maybe we need to push more through the lines we already have, right? And here FERC opened up this year a notice of inquiry on the use of dynamic line ratings to promote grid efficiency. Transmission line ratings could be based on forecasted weather conditions like wind, cloud cover, solar, and solar heating to enable greater power line flows. I'm like, whoa, look at that. We forecast that stuff. We've been doing it for years at wind and solar projects, right? So let's look at who's doing what in the marketplace and start providing a sort of a turnkey package to folks. Get this out of a pilot stage, get this out of a national lab stage, and actually get these types of dynamic line rating systems into commercial operations where it's actually going to bring more electricity to the market. All right. And, the nice thing about being Vaisala is we get to work with a lot of companies around the world. Here we work with WindSim Power, Many of you probably know WindSim because of the CFD modeling, and they were big in the wind space. They have an offshoot company now called WindSim Power that's focusing on this area. Real live dashboards that you can actually use to change from your static line rating up to a dynamic line rating and bring more electricity to market. What's really nice about working on this is it needs high resolution forecasts. You know, details do matter. It's not like a wind farm where you don't get extra credit if you forecast each individual turbine right? But here you do get extra credit if you get each segment of the transmission line right, because if you overload any one segment, then the whole thing falls apart, right? So using the WindSim model together with our capabilities for mesoscale modeling, feed back into that dashboard and bring this stuff out of the pilot and the lab, right, to bring it into commercial practice. Okay. Lastly, resource adequacy, right? What are we talking about here? Is like how windy was it and how sunny was it for a course of an entire month, right? And can it be forecast in advance accurately? Everybody would love to know of my customers. We're sitting here now at the beginning of June. Tell me what Q4 is going to look like of 2022. What? You know, got a hard enough time predicting what's going to happen next week, let alone months in advance. However, it's something that we're going to be working on for a while. So I'm just going to show you resource adequacy. What are we talking about? This is a globally available data set. This is just hot off the presses here. Anyone can come to our dashboard here at Vaisala Energy and get access to this for free. You don't have to pay us anything. We just do it as a service. It's updated as soon as the latest data comes in. We're looking at here ERA 5 wind speed anomalies, May 2022. Anything that's in red is positive. Anything that's in blue is negative. You can see a huge swath of the continental United States was significantly above average for windy. Yeah, it's been stormy, but has it been dark and stormy? All right. Well, up where I live in the Pacific Northwest, yeah, that's why I came to Denver. I'm like, I need some sun, man. I mean, it's been dark and stormy, right? So you see areas where you can have, let me just go back, where you can have positive wind and positive solar at the same time. And you can see areas like this. Look at Europe. This is wind. All of Europe was below for May. But, you know, what's that song? Here Comes the Sun. Boom. You know, above average for, you know, solar across the entire continent for the month of May as well, right? You can look at this on an annual basis as well. We've done a lot of work here in India. India's down here. You know, this is ERA 5 wind speed anomaly for the entire year, 2021. India was below average for the entire year. India was below average for all of solar as well. Ooh, well, thank goodness we're not in India, right, where we have this. Well, this was probably one of the biggest anomalies we've ever seen. This gets attention from a resource adequacy perspective. This is the wind speed anomaly first quarter of 2015, right? Most of the continental United States was significantly below its expected production for wind energy, including all of Texas. I mean, this is where all the wind farms are, right? Take a look at solar, boom. The Northeast had the sun, the West Coast had the sun, but Texas was double whammy, negative on the wind, negative on the sun, right? It does happen. And these are quarter long, first quarter. This is not going to be solved by a battery for a short period of time. This is proper planning at continental scales and being able to move power from places where it's generated to other places to deal with this resource adequacy problem when we go to these deployments of renewables that Charlie was talking about. So everybody wants to know, all right, well, can you predict this ahead of time? So what this shows here is skill score, which is percent improvement over climatology, going from 1 month to 12 months in advance, and how well can we predict Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. Anywhere where there's green on the board, we have skill at predicting that quarter at that lead time. What you can see is that Q1, and this is a site in Texas, we've got a lot of skill almost at every lead time in being able to predict what's going to be happening, you know, in the first quarter. Nothing in Q2, nothing in Q3, and then a little bit of visibility 2 to 6 months in advance of these anomalies, for wind and solar, for the site in Texas. So sometimes you have skill, sometimes you don't. Every time I say that, I think of the nut ad here. Sometimes you feel like a nut, sometimes you don't. All right. I love this stuff. I'm not that old, so hopefully I'll get to work on this for the next 10 or 20 years, and I'll be back to show progress on that. Thank you very much. I'll sit up here because we're going to have a Q&A after, right? Oh, I'm walking away with it. See, I still don't know how to behave.
Well, you'll get there.
I'll get it when I'm 70.
Thank you, Pascal. Next up, we have Gary Dorris. Gary Dorris has organically grown Ascend Analytics to be a 90+ person software and consulting company, providing quantitative solutions for resource planning, portfolio management, and short-term operations. His vision has led to development of over a dozen software applications used by over 100 energy companies. He also delivers expert testimony to portfolio management, risk management, energy trading, asset valuation, resource planning, including lead witness for Northwest Energy and Hawaii Electric in reshaping their energy supply portfolios to be renewable. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'll be talking about a very pragmatic issue, keeping it really simple. You have a day ahead, real-time opportunity for wind. What do you do with this asset to maximize its value with consideration of risk and uncertainty? This builds upon Pascal's presentation, and to his credit, uses Vaisala's data, which is of great explanatory power of what we're doing here. This is really an economic kind of trading floor bidding dynamic presentation. First, I have to just give the obligatory description of Ascend. Founded about 20 years ago in my basement. Today, we've grown the company to a little over 90 employees. It's kind of a nerd shop, 23 PhDs. We're focused on decision analytics and understanding the energy transition. Our activities span from long-term forecasting with our market intelligence and Power Sim for reliability analysis and resource planning. Our battery sim product is used extensively for hybrid and standalone storage projects, combined with the market intelligence for sizing, siting, and valuation. And I think we did about 36 financings last year, just independent evaluators. So we're pretty ubiquitous in the space. Some pretty cool interesting developments around how to use insurance products, which we dub insurance, for battery storage and now hybrid projects, just to guarantee revenues and increase leverage, guarantee loans in that second context of increasing leverage. And finally, we'll be talking about today, Smart Bidder. This is our algorithmic scheduling and coordination system. Sends also a QZ in Texas, scheduling coordinator elsewhere. And what we do is manage today about 4.6 gigs, another handful of gigs in the pipeline as well, just waiting for the projects to come online. So we're very firmly ensconced, not only in the long-term valuation, but in the operations. And I want to bring to you today kind of some of the pragmatic issues that we face in coming up with a day ahead versus real-time bid. And a lot of what we do is standalone renewables, but I'd say the bulk of what we do is hybrid projects or standalone storage. But it's a lot easier to understand just a renewable project, and given the DNA of this group with wind, let's start here because this brings together some of the core components in an easy to understand and value construct. So with day ahead operations, we're here and looking at on June 2nd at June 3rd. And we have a wind farm. This wind farm we'll look at is about 300 megawatts. It's in ERCOT. By 10 a.m., you have to submit your bid. By a little afternoon, I guess 1 p.m., the market clears. Midnight, beginning of the day, on June 3rd, we start. The commitments we're making are pure financial commitments. Now, if we're off and we commit in the day-ahead market, there can be a little bit of penalty called RUC charges, but generally, what we want to do is just think of this in the economic context as I have a day ahead price, and I have uncertainty in that price, and I have a day ahead quantity, and I have uncertainty in that quantity. Well, I have two variables with uncertainty. What I want to do is maximize the returns by 10 a.m. with my bids and minimize some of my risk, because I could be really, really wrong and say, oh, we're going to be at full tilt production, and we're not. And then I have to buy from the market. And that gets really painful if the real-time price is greater than the day ahead price, and I incur large losses. Nobody likes that. So there's a dimension of risk aversion that ensues when you make your daily bids. And I couldn't resist Yogi Berra in his description of forecasting. It's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. And it is. And certainly whether it's meteorological forecasting or the bid decision analysis. So let's go look at this. I'm going to get right into results. I'm actually going to skip over. I think I have like 10 minutes here. And then we can go back to some of the details of, as time permits, of how we do this. But in general, there's a framework when you're making this decision. You want to look at the real-time price spikes. What's the potential for real-time to exceed day ahead? And there's two factors here. First factor is there a probability of a price spike? How big is that? And then the second would be, is there a dark spread? Is the day ahead hourly price going to be greater than the real-time price? Or is it going to be reversed? Real-time greater than day ahead. So we have two dimensions that we look at. And you can do absolute price forecasting as well. That's useful. But really what we want to do is squeeze the data towards the core decision, because it's a binary decision. Either you bid the day ahead or you don't. And then the quantity, how much do you bid? All of which factors into the probabilities of future states occurring. In real time, we don't do any adjustments for wind. For storage, we do lots of adjustments. In Texas, we do it every 5 minutes. In California, once an hour, roughly 70 minutes before the hour. Risk really matters, though, because if you're averse towards losing, you can lose a lot of money by making a mistake and being overly confident in your production levels. Don't want to do that. You can also lose a lot of money in terms of opportunity costs by bidding a day ahead, and the real-time prices are much higher. That's not a good thing either. You want to happy to lock in when the day ahead is greater than real time, but not the other way around. So, and it gets really painful if you bid the day ahead, real time is greater, and your quantity is less than you expected. And then you have to buy from the market at a large loss. On average, the day ahead price is about, let's say, 8% greater than the real time price. That's great. You want to take advantage of that to the extent you can. The most sophisticated man in the world looks at risk too. It's the Sharpe ratio. You're not probably too familiar with it, but it's used in the finance industry all the time as a metric, and they use 10-year treasuries. In power, we use real-time price of electricity as our baseline. It's like the riskless 10-year treasury. And our objective here is to maximize profits subject to the probability of events. And we might look at a DART as a positive, a price spike as a negative in terms of our increment and decrement of bids. And we're going to maximize our profits subject to constraints. The risk constraint is the Sharpe ratio, and production constraints. How much have we forecast, or what probability levels do we want to bid in the day ahead market? The decision becomes something pretty simple in the end. Do I want to bid it all on the day ahead that I forecast at my P50 level? Do I want to bid at my P25 level for production? At what level am I willing to commit to a day ahead financial obligation to deliver in the real-time market? And then there's the potential for being thrown off our game by price spikes. And average spreads and spikes are different, but together they explain a lot, we find. So how does the probability of a spike change our guidance? We forecast a spread. That's simple. So you have a probability of the price DART, the day ahead, being greater than the real time. 20%, well, that's some spread, but not much. I like 80% down below, then I'm going to stick with the day ahead. But if there's a price spike, and spike we define usually over 100. These days it might be $200 because fuel prices are so high. And you can look at multiple levels of spikes and multiple levels of spreads. And that all factors into a decision analyst. So we need to forecast these spreads. We need to forecast the probabilities of spikes. And one of the things we found, and this will show up in the results, is standard machine learning. So we're looking at the objective function, that's reinforced learning, predictive, that's supervised learning. Does okay at forecasting. I'm part of the old guard, so we said, let's look at these econometric models and see if we can't beat them. We did, and we found something wrong. Most of the machine learning algos that we looked at, deep learning even, have really challenging time with co-integrated time series. So taking Pascal's data, which would be a co-integrated component, an explanatory dimension, and extracting predictive skill from that fully. They're relatively new immature algorithms. So we spent several months rewriting them. We have kind of what we call hybrid, but it's really just an amped up supervised learning model. And it does a great job of squeezing the data, and we have real skill. So I want to show you that skill. And we're doing this in squeezing data more fully instead of an absolute prediction, which is useful. We do absolute prediction with price. You can get a lot more value out of a probabilistic forecast. What's the probability of a spread? What's the probability of a price spike? And I'll skip this, but the problem, this is a logistic framework for how we forecast prices. This is a very classic construct of presenting a linearization of a logistic model. And this is the logistic likelihood function. So let's get to the results, because this is where the nerds deliver, and we really deliver. So this is the yellow is existing algo. Companies extremely proud of their algo and what they've been doing, and they've been averting a lot of risk. That's a good thing. The black line is real-time energy only. Remember I said that's kind of our 10-year treasury discount. Now let's look at the gold line. That's where the wind farm is being operated today. And this is revenues on the y-axis. If I did day ahead only, I'd be purple. And you can see the day ahead line, purple, moves up and down a lot more than the green and the gold. Well, that's more risk. And in purple, you don't like these successive day losses or this massive loss right here in purple. That's where you lose a lot of money. That's not a good thing. You're offering your quarterlies. Banks don't like it. You can't be operating with that much variability. So risk matters. And the way you temper risk is you offer less into the day ahead market generally. And the question, but you can earn more by offering more most of the time until you're really wrong. And that's the issue. So what you want to do is minimize your regret. You're going to get some losses, but also maximize your returns. And it's a balancing act. And so we look at the Sharpe ratio as a relative to the real-time energy. And we find that day ahead only's got a really low Sharpe ratio, not good. They did quite well. We were about 5% better in Sharpe ratio, and overall 7 to 10% better in earnings. That's a lot of money actually for a wind farm to earn 10% more and have less risk. It's kind of a no-brainer. That's shows you the power. And they've been working for years on this algo. I mean, they don't have 23 PhDs, but they have a lot of pride. And this data is publicly available. It's just like, there's their SCED data, there's what they've been doing, and you can step right in and clock them. There's a real room for better predictive skill, whether it's the input meteorology or the decision analytic that sits on top of that to add value. And it's material. I mean, and if we look at it the right lens with less risk. As you can see, it's pretty easy to beat anybody's algo by taking on more risk. The challenging part is to beat it with less risk. That's really neat. I got a few screenshots here of some of the key inputs in the day ahead forecasts, but I could fit on a slide that were important. Obviously, Pascal's data on, so Vaisala's data on day ahead forecast of wind is a key component, not only for the project, but for the region, right? And not just wind, solar matters too. We have the price spike probabilities, and the probability of a spike being over kind of 50% or below 50% determines the direction. Negative spikes count too, right? You want to understand a day ahead, you really want to lock in and not get stuck with the negative spike. That's a good thing. And collect the wreck if you can. And generally, day ahead prices are greater than real time. But negative spikes can be painful as well if wind produces more. In this case, we're expecting prices or production to really die at the end of the day. But what happens is not only does production die, it dies so much that real-time prices in dark blue here blow out the day ahead in light blue. And we end up with real-time being greater than day ahead. If we look at the overall revenue dimensions here, we're seeing in dark blue almost equivalent to periods here. We're producing a ton because the prices are just so high. And fortunately, we had a high probability of a price spike, and that resulted in us withholding to realize the real-time prices. So we knew there'd be a negative dart spread combined with the high potential for a price spike back off. That's kind of what's going on effectively. And the quantity in the day ahead market was de minimis, and we made all of our money in real time. And even though we're producing hardly anything in terms of production levels, the revenue is equivalent just because the price is so high. Had we done the opposite, it would have been we could have lost a lot of money. And this is where risk return matters in assimilating the pieces of the meteorology and combining them with the enhanced decision analytics of a reinforced learning model combined with supervised learning for predictive skills is key. So the key takeaways. An optimal strategy for a project should account for revenue and risk. And risk is something subjective, and you need to look at this. You need to have multiple strategies and understand your risk tolerances and set those up as part of your constraints. There's a lot of opportunity for day-ahead real-time energy and spreads to be captured and value to be extracted and opportunity costs to be mitigated. And optimal strategies need to be tuned locally for each project at the nodal forecasted price. And the value is significant. And I mean, this is massive differentials in return on equity. It's a 10% return on increase in revenue, pure to the bottom line. It's like I've been told a 25% increase in return on equity. So those are our results, and I think it builds nicely on what Pascal has done, and thank you for your input, because without it, we wouldn't have had these. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. We get the mic over to the next speaker. Good. Gary presented a great view of this from the point of view of the very important financial players and the market participants there. And it's a very important business, certainly a lot of agreement here. We're next going to look more from the point of view of operations, the system operator. And joining us virtually is going to be Congcong Wang, lead operator of risk assessment at MISO. She spent over 10 years in research and market design focused on price formation, new market product development, and advanced resource modeling. She played a key role in MISO market development, such as the extended LMP, emergency pricing, ramp capability product, multiple configuration, combined cycle modeling, and so forth. Congcong joined operations about 3 years ago and now building on an operations risk assessment team to provide forecasts and risk assessment for control room operations. She has her PhD in electrical engineering and an MA in economics from University of Connecticut. So welcome, Congcong.
Thanks, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. First, Ryan, could you help me to check? Can you hear me well? Can you see the slides?
Looks great.
Great. Sorry for not being able to join in person. Do appreciate the opportunity to participate remotely. Now hearing Charlie's introduction, all the great discussion, I really hate to miss those discussions. So let's look at the forecasting and market participation for utility scale wind and solar here. Why this is an important topic. So with the retirement of the aging thermal units and also the carbon emission reduction goals by utilities and states, wind and solar are really becoming prominent resource types. Look at the MISO's generation mix. Right now, we have about 13% of energy from wind and solar, and we do expect this number potentially double or even triple by 2030. Some might say, well, 20%, 30% might not be eye-opening enough, but look at this is really measured by energy. If you look at capacity, the wind and solar share will be even larger. So according to Berkeley Labs survey of 85% of utilities in the US, as of 2021, MISO region, we are looking at like up to 100 gig of solar with another 10 or 20 gig of wind. So this green theme is not only at the mid-continent region, it's actually across the board from the East Coast like PJM to the West Coast like CalISO. So while the renewable energy has great benefits in a lot of regards, they do, the weather-dependent intermittent resources do bring reliability challenges. The volatile wind output levels could easily alter our supply-demand conditions, especially now given the tightening reserve margins with the retirements. So, for example, here on a hot summer day with low wind output, that can easily take us to the emergency situation, whereas on a similar day with high wind output, we could manage through just fine. So the wind, further to add, the wind variability and uncertainty further complicates the commitment decisions. A very extreme example, just April 21st of last year, right around the evening load peak, our wind drastically dropped by about 4 gig in less than 1 hour. So despite our efforts to bring online every megawatt that we can get to, we still experienced 2 real-time intervals of price cap. So that's kind of like a real production demonstration of the challenge we are experiencing. So in managing those challenges, forecasting provides critical foresight for the market and operation decisions from days ahead to next day, hours ahead until real time. So I like highlight here just the commitment and dispatch horizon more heavily rely on the wind and solar forecast. So the multi-day forward reliability assessment commitment process looks 7 days ahead. It evaluates the operating reserve margin, what we call, essentially the available resource above the load obligation. From there, we determine the long lead commitments. And then the day-ahead market is a financial market utilizing the market participant offered base, including the offers, the wind and solar offers by the market participant. I'm sure that is based upon forecast too, like Gary just talked about. After day-ahead market, we solve the next day FRAC process using the day-ahead hourly forecast. And during operating day, we have the intraday rack, and we have a 3-hour look-ahead commitment runs every 15 minutes, and a 8-hour look-ahead commitment runs every hour, utilizing mostly hourly forecast, and then we'll get close enough also the 5-minute forecasts. The unit dispatch system solves every 5 minutes, also clears the real-time market. So that is looking ahead at 10 minutes, utilizing the 5-minute forecast either by MISO or submitted by market participant. So historically, all these processes are deterministic. And recently, except for the day-ahead real-time markets that are still deterministic, we start to introduce scenario and risk capability into our commitment processes. Although those capabilities are still quite manual, but we do have the research looking at the stochastic commitment model in a more automatic way. So with forecasting being so important for market and grid operations, what are we doing, or what do we want to get done most? First, I'd like to say the forecast accuracy improvement. Interestingly, since I moved to this area from the market side, either from the conferences or reading the research articles, I don't see this topic as much. It might be because this is too obvious, but I do believe we can never emphasize its importance too much, because it has both the economic and the reliability benefits. Look at the figure on the left. Over the past years, we have been working with our vendor to really improve the forecasts as measured by the percentage errors. But because the renewable penetration is really outpacing the pace we improve the forecast, you see we end up having much larger megawatt errors. So right now we have a ramp capability product and a short-term reserve product to account for the wind uncertainties, typically covering the 2.5 sigma, depending on the situation. So with almost 30 gigawatt of wind we have, let's see the forecast improvement can introduce the reduction of the needs requirements by 300 megawatt. This is very illustrative, simple math just to show the potential economic benefits. And let's say the reserve cost is about $1 per megawatt, and a year it really gives us 2.6 million. We all know with the zero like marginal cost renewable resource and more uncertainties we have, the reserve price is more trending higher. So this benefit could easily multiply by several times. On the reliability side, while we see the forecast error are modest on average, we do experience large errors on days like here showing, especially like during the peak load hour, highlighted here. So then our day at the forecast came off by almost 5 gigawatt, and even comes 4 hours ahead, we still had 3 gigawatts off. So those gaps really resulted in the commitment or decommitment of almost like tens of thermal units. And depending on what resource we have available, if we don't have resource then we can start fast enough, that could really lead into the shortage or scarcity situation. With forecasts never being able to be perfect, an equally important question is how much confidence do we have in the forecast? So risk assessment is another area we are focusing. So we leverage advanced data analytics trying to quantify the risks. And from there, we define dynamic reserve requirements that vary by season, and vary also by hours of the day, like based on the high, medium, low risk. So we all know for any market products, you can only cover this much of the confidence level. So for things that fall out of the confidence interval, what are the pre-indicators so that we can better prepare for it? So those tail events or extreme events are really low probability, but high stake events. So to better manage that, we have this weather risk assessment going on, try to pre-identify those extreme events, looking at the weather patterns. For example, I'm sure a lot of you remember another very cold winter in Minnesota area, 2019, with temperature in Minnesota goes down negative 20, 30, or even below. So with that, the cold temperature cutoff was a huge risk identified, as well as icing. So that's kind of like a good example by right now, with us better identify those pre-indicators, we can better prepare for the risk and even improve the forecast along. Probabilistic forecast is another popular research area. I'm sure the rest of the conference will talk a lot. What I want to emphasize here is really how to integrate probabilistic forecast into the operation or market processes. So right now, we do have in production the uncertainty spread developed based on multiple numerical weather prediction models. So we, since like a couple of years ago, we started to consider these scenarios in our operations planning process. We are also working with the industry and the research community to really look at a probabilistic forecast and its use case in the unit commitment. So I believe both Vaisala and MISO participate in this probabilistic solar forecast project by Johns Hopkins University, NREL, IBM, and UTD. And we also work with Arizona State University, NREL, Sandia, and Nexent on the stochastic look-ahead commitment with the ARPA-E project. So with all the important initiatives going on, what are other challenges that are keeping grid operators up at night, actually up 24/7? Transmission congestion and wind curtailment. I think you heard the transmission a lot in Charlie's introduction already. So keep in mind, between what is forecasted and what you actually get, forecast error is not the only reason. So an increasing portion of the gap right now is the wind or solar resource being dispatched down, especially for us is wind, since we have much higher penetration of wind. So despite look at sample day here, despite good forecasting record, wind couldn't materialize much less than forecasted because of the transmission congestion. So it happened right last month on May the 12th. We forecasted 20 gig of wind. So looking at our operating reserve margin days or day ahead, we looked fine. But coming in real time, especially the night before, we had a storm coming through the Minnesota area, knocked down some transmission lines, and also this is typical outage season. The congestion really kind of like dispatched, caused the wind undeliverable, and we actually only got about 15 gig of wind. So this large risk directly contributed to a capacity emergency situation on that day. So while the transmission issue needed collaborative efforts from planning to operations, the question here is how can we have better foresight of transmission congestion or wind curtailment so that we can better act on it when we have more solution options available instead of wait until like real time. Besides the wind solar risk actually combined with other sources of uncertainty further complicated the operations and market decisions. So grid operators, besides wind and solar, also have to manage multiple sources of uncertainty, such as the load, which is now really complicated by the distributed energy resource like behind the meter solar, and the generator outages. The fuel uncertainty is becoming another important factor with both gas and coal, transmission side risk, and even the interchange transaction with the neighbors. Moreover, these uncertainties tend to be correlated, and operations have to manage aggregate uncertainty. So the question is, how can we synthesize multiple sources of uncertainty and better characterize the aggregate uncertainty? So finally, want to put this in MISO's reliability imperative. So linked here is a really nice put living document that gives the full picture of the operating challenge the grid operators facing in the evolving generation fleet and our overarching responses to these challenges. So particularly for wind and solar, as discussed, forecasting provides critical foresights for market and grid operations. And by leveraging data analytics, meteorological techniques to better characterize the risk, that really helps us to really more reliably and efficiently manage uncertainties and variability of the renewables. And from there, we'll be able to further define dynamic reserve requirements and also really integrate the more probabilistic or scenario capability into our tools and processes, and even in the markets down the road. So as said, the challenge is really increasing, including the foresight of congestion, wind curtailment, aggregate uncertainty management, and more so like solar. Right now, we're expecting our solar to grow from the current 2 gig to almost 15 gig in the next couple of years. And that definitely change our risk profile, and let alone all other like hybrid resource, the behind distributed energy resource. Those are all introducing emerging challenges. So with that, really call for innovation, solution, and actually collaboration across the industry as we integrate more clean energy in our system, but also like better manage those challenges. So I think that's all I have.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Excellent. Next, we're going to be joined by Lars Rohwer from Energy and Meteo Systems in Germany. He flew in from Husum, Germany. We have a long history here of great participation from E&M and the very interesting work they're doing in Germany and in the German markets. Lars studied 2 semesters of energy engineering before changing to meteorology. And since 2020, he's been an energy meteorologist at Energy and Meteo Systems in the forecast quality assurance team. And his job combines the preferences of weather and electricity in their products. Thank you, Lars.
So, yeah, thank you. So my presentation is about the forecasting and market participation of virtual power plants at the one side. I will give you an overview, and as I traveled as a meteorologist to the US, I wanted to give you insights into the solar power forecast of energy and meteo systems and our adaptations for our US customers. So we will start with the virtual power plant. If you don't exactly know what a virtual power plant is, no problem. The next 2 slides will explain it. But first, I want to tell you the VPPs were mostly used by traders till now. They just needed it for the market access. So yeah, till now traders were the most customers, but VPPs become more and more important for system operators as well. So in Germany, we see it with Westnetz. It's a big system operator in Western Germany. And they just got a VPP now. Yeah, that's why the regular control rooms aren't designed for communication with many small plants. And with renewable energies, you have a lot of small plants. And yes, VPP can fill this gap. It can just act like a small control room in the control room, or like a standby control room. So the VPP can just get the data from, we have here the wind power, the solar plants, we have hydro energy, bioenergy, then we have storage systems. The data from all this you can just integrate in the VPP, and yeah, it's a great help for ISOs as well. But even nowadays, not just the system operators are getting more and more important. It's even the intraday market. So it started in the last years in France, in the UK, in Greece, and yeah, the intraday market is nearly not possible without a VPP. You need just all this information, your measurements, your forecasts, and VPP is more or less necessary to do this intraday market. So in Europe, just every big E.ON, Stadtkraft, Centrica, Ørsted, all just get data from those VPPs to control their portfolio. On the next slide, we will see the data point of this VPP. It's just for connecting different kinds of generators, storage systems, and load. So on the left-hand side, you can see, oh, that's not good. Oh. We need to start it again. Okay, you on the left side, you see the different portfolios this customer integrated with different plants, wind power plants, solar power plants, hydro plants. So everything is integrated. On the right hand side, you can see such as the measurements of this power plant and a forecast for this measurement for the power production for the next hours. That's just a screenshot out of this virtual power plant. So you can integrate very different measurements like live data, metering point data, SCADA data. It's not just ORs. You can integrate, if you have them, all of them. So you just can compare them. But we do a real-time plausibility check. So if the data are corrupt, we won't use them, for example, for short-term adaptation. So we just check all the data if there are plausibility. Yeah, and this VPP also is a full availability information center. So you have just, you can see all your non-availabilities, you can edit them, you can delete them, you can integrate new non-availabilities, but you don't need to, you can just import them from your system. So, but you can if you want to. So that's the data side. Then we have the forecast side. Here you see a screenshot of a solar power plant with this measurement data. On the first day, that's the live data, and here also metering point data. Then you see different forecasts on the yellow line. It's not so clear, but the yellow line is with adaptation to the live data. Then you have the orange line that's just without adaptation to the live data, and you can just integrate forecasts from different providers. You can integrate a combined forecast, so you can set different factors, and then you can see this combined forecast in your VPP. So yeah, you have a lot of changes to do. And with all this information, so the measurement data, the forecast data, then the non-availabilities, curtailments, you can just do your direct marketing of your renewable energy portfolio. And yeah, for that, it's quite good. You can remote control your plants, your installations with the VPP. If they are directly connected to our VPP, you can do curtailments, dispatches if you want to. So in just a few facts about our VPP, so we have just directly connected. I just asked a college this morning, 600 megawatts of battery storage, 17 gigawatts of solar power, and 73 gigawatts of wind power. That's just directly connected, so not our forecast, but the directly connected to our VPP, so our customers can just remote control all this PV, wind, and storage systems. This was the overview of the virtual power plant. Now I will deeper dive into our solar power forecasts. There are the two different forecasts for this larger individual plants and for behind the meter. So we do it for CAISO or individual, we do it for MISO, for example. For individual large plants, you have your measurement of each plant mostly, but behind the meter, you don't even know the rooftop solar power plants. You don't know the power production of every solar plant. So you have to do it with estimation. We cooperate with companies for photovoltaic inverters, so we can do quite good estimations of power production nearly all over the world. So, and behind the meter, you just have forecast for your X plants in a region. So you do a regional forecast, while you do for individual plants, you do a forecast for this point for this location where the plant is located. And yeah, you use this, you have specific master data you can use for the power forecasts. In the behind the meter forecast, even the customer often don't know the installed capacity. So we can get it out of this estimation. So if you see how much power was measured by the photovoltaic inverters, we can just estimate installed capacity for our customers, for the regions or for their portfolio. And out of a meteorological view, some new features we just integrated in our solar power forecast. We saw the solar power in forecast for Germany or Europe aren't even the same than for the US. For example, we do have for situational awareness, we have a potential power reduction report due to fog. So our customers know there can be an overproduction, and this report we had for the intraday. But the US customer said, no, we need it for the day ahead, of course. And we just integrated, I think, 2 or 3 months ago. So on the black line, you see the forecasted power production out of, what the weather prediction models say. And on the red line is a worst case scenario. So our customer knows, it's possible that there will be an over forecast in the intraday, but in the day ahead, it's not much bigger. So yeah, be prepared. Even the same we got for snow. So snow or snow-free power reduction or peak up due to a snow-free. And we just don't have it as a report. We just adapt our forecast directly with a snow-free adaptation. And we do use meteorological data, measurements, satellite data. And so we just saw mostly in the north of the US that there's a lot of snow. In Germany, there's less snow. And these are big errors, this snow-free. So we just needed this new adaptation. We just integrated this year. Quite new is the integration of a solar facility with integrated battery. So the battery only charges from solar. It's an US plant. And our customer wanted the forecast, the solar power, the battery only charges from solar, and we just have to forecast it. We have to know how many the battery can get, and yeah, that's not easy at all. But we think that will be a bigger thing in the future, and we just do it like more or less research at the moment. And we did some research as well with sky cams in northern Germany and in Asia. So now there can be a research in the US next year, but it's not just that safe. Our most problem with that is with our adaptations and our the measurement data we get. Our short-term correction is quite good, and it's hard for the SkyCam correction to be better than our short-term correction. So it's till now it's not the SkyCams is quite not better than our short-term correction. So this was just a quick overview, and thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much. I think the virtual power plant things that have been going on in Germany there are very, very interesting, and perhaps relevant here to our final speaker for this section, Nate Blair from NREL. So Nate is Group Manager in Analytics in the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, NREL. You spent almost 30 years of experience with energy system modeling and energy analysis. His time at NREL includes roles developing the System Advisory Model, SAM, and PV watts, as well as the Reed's electric grid planning model. He's been leading NREL's storage future study and is also the technical lead on the Puerto Rico 100 project that is currently underway. So very happy to have Nate join us from NREL.
There, can you hear me now? Okay, thanks. This talk is going to talk about forecasting, slightly different use of the term forecasting, thinking about where we're going over the next few decades with regards to storage primarily. I will talk about distributed storage adoption and what that might mean. But I think storage in general, as everybody maybe knows, has a direct impact on the accuracy of the forecast that you need and the flexibility that you can get from the grid. And so I think it's relevant to this panel. So we've been working for a number of years. Let me start my timer because I can easily start talk for a long time. Because it's exciting, and we're looking at several decades, but I think the near term is what's going to be important, and some of these other pieces hopefully. We wrote a lot of reports, as we tend to do at NREL, with a lot of pages, and so if you want more than what I'm going to cover in the next 15 minutes, then we've got 6 other reports to talk about. I'm talking about sort of the last one. I think that the other ones really talk about the drivers for the adoption of storage. I'm going to talk a little bit more about report number 4, distributed storage customer adoption scenarios, because I think that's relevant. But we talk about a number of different factors, number of different technologies, et cetera. And I think that's interesting. So we came out of these 7 reports with these 8 key learnings. So there are probably another 80 key learnings if you dig into all of those reports, but these are the ones that we can stand behind. I would add that there are a number of things that I'm willing to say on a panel that we aren't sure about yet, right? Particularly in this long duration storage area and some of these longer pieces. And I know Brady in the back is going to talk about that later. But I think there's a lot of unknowns as we get further out there. If we have time, we can circle back to some of those. So key learning number 1 is that no matter what, we're going to have a lot of storage, and we're going to have a lot of diurnal storage. And so just to be clear, this case on the left, the reference case, is looking at not 100% clean electricity, but more like 70, 75, 65. We're not talking about 100% in all of these cases. We purposely designed this study several years ago with the idea of people have started to look at 100%. People have looked a lot at 20, 25%. What's this middle ground look like? And how much storage do we need? So we ran a bunch of scenarios, as you can see in the lower right. And in no case did we not add, several fold in terms of the amount of storage that we have on the grid today. And I think that's our number 1 takeaway. Number 2 takeaway, if I have more time, I have a slide showing, the price drops in PV, the price drops in wind. Charlie had a great lead into this slide because the price drops have been dramatic in battery storage in particular, 80, 90%, depending on how you count it, over the last 10 years. We are anticipating additional drops of somewhere between 30 and 55, 60% over the next 10 years, and drops beyond that. And I think from a deployment standpoint and from a operations of the grid standpoint, it has a couple of effects. As you can see, if you look at the graph on the right, and sorry, both of these graphs have the exact same data. One is plotted in dollars per kilowatt hour. So on the left, so more kind of in terms of the amount of energy, and on the right, dollars per kilowatt at different durations. So obviously, 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, you need a larger battery, but the amount of power coming out of it is the same. And what you see on the right, which I think is an interesting takeaway, in addition to the key learning, is that right now, if you are thinking about your grid and you're thinking about, hey, in this spot on the grid, we need a 4-hour battery, the jump from 4 hours to 6 hours is really pretty significant, that first circle on the left there. Now, if we get out to 2050, where the cost of the battery pack has dropped dramatically, and you see that the remaining cost is the permitting and this, labor and the installation and all those fixed costs, the jump from 4 hours to 6 hours of battery capacity is much, much less. And so I don't know if we have any utilities out there, but my anticipation is that from a risk reduction standpoint, you're going to be more motivated in the future to oversize your battery than you are today. And I think that's going to give you some extra leeway also when you start thinking about what is the forecast for solar and wind for tomorrow. Oh, you know what? We've got a little extra battery capacity. So I think that's an important factor that we're going to see more and more as these prices continue to decline. There's a lot of technologies out there. I was meeting with some people at NREL this morning, very interested in a variety of energy storage technologies. We've built this axis to help people think about what these technologies are. Some of these technologies, the dots are big because the data is uncertain, particularly when it comes to cost. So what you look at here is the capital cost for the power on the left, and you add that to the capital cost of the energy across the bottom. And so there's technologies across the bottom, which are maybe good for short duration, right? They don't cost much per power unit, but they cost more per energy unit. So longer durations will get more expensive. On the vertical axis, those are some technologies that might be really great for long duration storage, 10, 15, 20, 200 hours, et cetera. Because as you add more duration, you don't add that much cost. And so a number of those have been around for a while. A number of those are emerging. There is a lot of money flowing into this whole sector. It might slow down now that interest rates are going up, but that's another talk for another day. But the point being that there's a lot of interest in this. And what we've tried to do is just sort of say, here's the hurdle that you need to overcome if you want to get in that lower left box, which is going to be effectively cheaper than lithium ion batteries. And it's a pretty significant hurdle for a number of these technologies, but not to say it can't happen. Key learning number 3, many of you that work on grid operations probably already know this, and the resource adequacy comment that was made earlier is relevant to this, but the storage, the vast bulk of the value to a storage unit is from the capacity that the storage unit provides. I think in a simplistic view, it's great to think about moving solar from during the day to the evening. But I think one of the things that all this forecasting leads to is, geez, what is the capacity that's provided by the storage? When do we need that capacity? How much capacity do we need? And are we valuing that capacity in the market appropriately? And so what our modeling allows us to look at is we build a lot more capacity if we're or a lot more storage if we're valuing capacity than if we're just valuing the time shifting from the day to the night. If we value that capacity, we get up to the green line. If we value both of them, we get up to the blue line in terms of what the model thinks is an optimum amount of storage deployment. And there's a whole 100 pages about that if you want to read more. So NREL has been showing this slide on grid flexibility since probably before the first UIG meeting. I'm not sure. It's an oldie but a goodie, but it's all of these ways that as we think about putting more solar and more wind on the grid, and back then it was just wind, how do we provide grid flexibility? And there's a lot of ways to do it. And I think people in this room are familiar with many of these. The thing that's changed that we want to point out is that on the upper right here, electrochemical storage and storage in general was always deemed to be one of the most expensive grid flexibility options that you could deploy, right? You want to think about demand response. You want to think about smart operations, all before that. Some of that's changing. So this rather dramatic decrease in battery storage costs have shifted its position with regards to some of these other flexibility options. Do I have a specific spot where it fits in now? No, because depending on the system and the other options, these can all move around a little bit, but the idea is that it is now a more viable, lower cost flexibility option. I think this one, probably people in this room are very familiar with key learning number 5. Storage and PV complement each other. In the upper left, you see the influx of the duck curve in California, and you see this shrinking of the daily peak from, let's call it 6-7 hours down to 2 or 3 hours. You know what? 2 or 3 hours, if we look back at my cost graph, that's a lot cheaper to meet for 100 megawatts of 2 to 3 hour battery versus 100 megawatts of 7-hour battery, right? So as the solar comes in, it squeezes that evening peak together, makes it a lot narrower, makes it a lot cheaper to meet with a battery. And then the battery takes that next chunk off. And eventually, you know, they kind of keep competing and helping each other, because then that also makes the PV more viable. This graph on the right is an operations graph. The top boxes are from 2020. The bottom boxes are from 2030. You see is one thing is that between 2020 and 2030, you start charging the storage in the middle of the day versus in the evening when prices are cheap. And then you can see in that third set of arrow circle combinations is that by 2030, that summer peak has gotten a lot narrower. And so it's a lot cheaper to meet with storage. And so you see as solar deploys, storage is easier to deploy. As more storage deploys, solar gets a little easier to deploy. So they work very well together. Okay, so distributed PV plus storage. Right now, we have started modeling in a tool called DGen, the adoption rates of distributed PV plus storage, and we've paired them together. So in the model, we've assumed at this point a 2-hour battery and different levels of PV depending on the client or agent in the model. But the result is that there is a pretty significant level of economic deployment, economic potential. Economic potential just means at some point over the lifetime of this PV and storage system, it pays off. You've got about 100 and, in the base case, about 120 gigawatts of economic potential, rises as high as 250 in some cases with cheap options, and can be a little bit lower. It's a function of the obvious things, the battery cost, the PV cost, but also we included the value of backup power. So there are a number of places around the country, and I think she was just talking about MISO and trees falling on transmission lines and distribution lines. There are a number of places, and we have tracked what the kind of typical outage rates are across the country, and we paired that with what people in surveys will say they'll pay for backup power on the mainland, and combine that together into a value of backup power to the customer, and incorporated that. And if the value of backup power goes up, the adoption of PV plus storage goes up. I'm also working in Puerto Rico, where the value of backup power is significantly higher than anything we've modeled for the mainland. And so we've included all of that. In this lower graph, what you can see is that economic potential, where at some point during the time of the system, it pays back. At the bottom one, you can see the dramatic reduction in that actual adoption or modeled adoption. And that's because while it pays back, the payback periods are quite long. So we're talking 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years of payback period. And so that makes the adoption rates really slow based on our modeling. So if the payback period was 2, 3, 4 years, you would see a lot more people adopting PV plus batteries around the country. And this is all a function of a variety of inputs, including gas prices, et cetera. The one thing, one of the caveats that we have for this study that we didn't model because it was just emerging, it's still emerging, but the question of using electric vehicles as backup power in emergency outages. I was watching the Super Bowl, like I'm sure many of you, eating too many chips, and saw 5 commercials about EV car companies talking about using their car for backup power. And I was like, oh crap, we should do more studies. We should do more modeling. So as soon as the Super Bowl was over, we sent the kids to bed and I wrote a proposal to DOE. No, but the idea is there's a couple of caveats across all of these storage pieces, and that's a big one for here. Like if that ends up providing for a lot of people a backup option, then that mitigates the value of that from an on-site permanent storage system. Key learning number 7, I'm almost out of time. Storage durations will increase. So while I talked about solar squeezing the peak, eventually that only goes so far. And eventually you have to dive further and further into those end of the day periods. And we end up putting longer and longer duration storage onto the grid. So as you saw in our reference case, we actually built out a little bit of 10-hour storage. This is another scenario, a couple of scenarios where we're building out, it starts quick at 2, jumps to 4 pretty quickly, and then starts to slowly migrate up to 6, 7, and 8 as you get to higher and higher levels of storage capacity, and then paired with that, higher levels of renewables. So PV narrows the peak, but only to a point. Eventually, we're going to need longer duration diurnal storage. And then lastly, key learning number 8, eventually, this is a scenario at 100%. At 100% decarbonization of the electric grid, we're getting 94% of this power met by variable renewable energy, so PV wind, plus hydropower and a little geothermal. 6% is met by renewable fueled combustion turbines or combined cycle power plants. And so that renewable fuel is either biofuels or hydrogen. So caveat here is, we are assuming, and Charlie had a good lead into this too, where we're assuming that there is a hydrogen economy that develops. There's a hydrogen economy that develops to support the decarbonization of the industrial sector. And some of that hydrogen can be used and burned to provide electricity during these periods. So you can see here on the left, this is curtailment of renewables on the top, and this is generation from these thermal sources on the bottom. And so we see a lot of curtailments. This is, again, the US system as a whole, kind of in that spring timeframe. We see the need for this thermal burning kind of in that summer timeframe, kind of, and into the winter. So, so I'm not saying what exactly we're going to do with seasonal storage at 100%, but I am saying that in an optimal case, at the price points that we entered, there is an optimum that includes seasonal storage. So we could build a lot more PV, throw a lot of it away. We could build a lot more wind, throw a lot of it away. We could do a bunch of different things. We could have demand flexibility. We could get people to charge their cars during the day, et cetera, et cetera. But it does seem like we might want to have some of this long duration storage. All right. Thank you very much.